Barack Obama has said, even if we only had Christians in our midst, if we expelled every non-Christian from the United States of America, whose Christianity would we teach in the schools? Barack Obama has spoken out on Christianity for quite some time. He seems to have a great deal of hostility towards Christianity, but very rarely, if ever, says anything negative against his Islamic faith. And in a quotation he gave some time ago, he said, "And even if we did have only Christians in our midst, if we expelled every non-Christian from the United States of America, whose Christianity would we teach in the schools? Would we go with James Dobson's or Al Sharpton's? Which passages of Scripture should guide our public policy? Should we go with Leviticus, which suggests slavery is okay and that eating shellfish is an abomination? How about Deuteronomy, which suggests stoning your child if he strays from the faith? Or should we just stick to the Sermon on the Mount, a passage that is so radical that it's doubtful that our own Defense Department would survive its application? So before we get carried away, let's read our Bibles. Folks haven't been reading their Bibles. This is typical of lots of liberals out there, especially the shellfish argument has been used numerous times. But let me go through these rather quickly. He says, okay, look, let's say we got rid of all of the non-believers out there and we sent them away, we only had Christians. Well, whose version of Christianity would we follow? Well, you got the same dilemma no matter what law system you choose. Let's say we get rid of all of the people who don't believe that the Constitution is a valid system of government and only have those people who believe that the Constitution is in fact a valid system of government. Whose views do we follow? Do we take, and we look at the Supreme Court on certain decisions, these 5-4 decisions that have taken place, the one on the Second Amendment, for example, on being able to own a gun based upon the written directive of the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms. You had 4 justices who said that particular very, very clear amendment does not apply in terms of personal gun ownership. You had 5 justices who took the opposite position. And so just because one believes in a system of government or one believes in a system of laws does not necessarily mean that those laws are going to be applied in a consistent way. So just because there is disagreement among biblical scholars on how a particular law ought to be applied, there's a great deal of agreement on how the law should be applied in very specific areas. So this false dichotomy that Barack Obama has made just doesn't fit with the way we do things in other areas. And he goes on to say here, should we go with Leviticus, which suggests slavery is okay and that eating shellfish is abomination? Well, if you really study the Bible in terms of slavery, you'll note that if the Bible had been followed, we never would have had slavery here in the United States. Now, the Bible does talk about indentured servitude. Instead of sending somebody off to prison, generally what took place was if it was a property crime, that person would have to pay a double or quadruple restitution, depending on what was stolen. If it was simply a commodity, it was double restitution. If it was maybe some livestock, a cow or a bull, there'd be multiple restitution because those particular animals would produce generationally over a longer period of time, and so they were much more valuable. But in terms of not being able to pay back in a property crime, what generally took place is that somebody would become an indentured servant. That is, they would have to work off their debt. They didn't send them off to prison. They would work it off. They would be a slave for a period of time. But the type of slavery that was practiced here in the United States for a number of centuries was the result of kidnapping, going over to another nation and stealing people from that nation and bringing them over here, putting them on the market and selling them. That is definitely prohibited in the Bible. And if Americans had followed the Bible on all this, we never would have had slavery here in the United States. So this is another one of those arguments that really does not pass the assessment test here. And the thing about shellfish, oh, look, the Bible prohibits you eating shellfish. Actually, the Bible prohibits, the Old Testament prohibits us, at least the Jews at that particular period of time, from eating a number of foodstuffs. It wasn't just shellfish. But when you get into the New Testament, the New Testament is very clear about this, that Jesus had declared that all foods were made clean. If you go to Mark chapter 7, verses 18 through 23, it says, "And Jesus said to them, to the scribes and Pharisees, are you also as lacking in understanding? Don't you realize that nothing going into a man from the outside can defile him? For it doesn't go into his heart, but into the stomach and is eliminated." And then there's a parenthesis here. "As a result, Jesus made all foods clean." Then he said, "What comes out of a person, that defiles him. For from within, out of a person's heart, come evil thoughts, sexual immoralities, thefts, murders, adulteries, greed, evil actions, deceit, promiscuity, stinginess, blasphemy, pride, and foolishness. All these evil things come from within and defile a person." And other passages in Scripture deal with the same issue. If you look at Romans chapter 14, verses 2 and 3, "One man has faith that he may eat all things, but he who is weak eats vegetables only. Let not him who eats regard with the contempt him who does not eat, and let not him who does not eat judge him who eats, for God has accepted him." And we know from the book of Acts that Peter is reluctant to take the gospel to the Gentiles. This is in Acts chapter 9. And then in a vision, you've got really two scenarios here. You have Cornelius, who's a Gentile, getting a vision that he is going to be visited by someone, in this case Peter, and Peter who gets a vision with unclean animals being brought before him, and he is to take, kill, and eat. And Peter says, "I've never eaten any unclean thing." And God says, "Don't call unclean what I call clean." And of course, those unclean animals represent the Gentiles. And in the New Testament, we see here that Gentiles are incorporated into the believing people of God. And you have other passages where you find a similar emphasis. Again, Romans chapter 14, verse 6. "He who observes the day observes it for the Lord. He who eats does so for the Lord, for he gives thanks to God. And he who eats not for the Lord, he does not eat, and gives thanks to God as well." You can see the same emphasis in 14, verses 14 through 23. Colossians chapter 2, you see this similar emphasis here on food. Colossians 2:16, "Therefore let no one act as your judge in regard to food or drink, or in respect to a festival or a new moon or a Sabbath day, things which are a mere shadow of what is to come, but the substance belongs to Christ." And so the New Testament is very clear that there are a number of issues that have changed in the New Testament. Blood sacrifices have passed away. Circumcision we no longer have to abide by. We don't need a temple. We don't need a priesthood. The New Testament informs us very, very clearly on these issues. And so to make these types of appeals, as Barack Obama has done, just does not understand how the Bible works. And it's unfortunate that a lot of Christians have fallen into this trap by pitting the Old Testament over against the New Testament. There's no need to do so. We live within the harmony of these testaments. This is why it is called the Bible. It's not called the Bibles. The book of Hebrews makes very clear that there are certain things from the Old Testament which in fact have passed away for a very good reason they have passed away, and we are given a directive on why they have passed away.
American Vision is proud to present this year's Worldview Super Conference, July 21st through 24th at North Metro Church, Marietta, Georgia. For more information, visit conference.americanvision.org. That's conference.americanvision.org.